He built a working program in 4 days without knowing a single line of code, except for some forgotten school knowledge. The method was simple. Tell the machine what you want and press yes to every suggestion it makes without reading what exactly it changes. 600 times in a row. Let's analyze what actually happened. You wrote a program without knowing how to program. How did you verify that it actually worked?
It did what I wrote it for. It wasn't a strict verification, yes, but it did what it was supposed to do. I spent years sitting next to programmers, nodding at their explanations, the way you nod at a doctor describing an operation you will never perform yourself. Here, it was different. I could see what was happening right during the conversation.
So, the criterion was, it seems to be working?
Formally speaking, yes.
Do you admit that it might have simply been convincingly imitating the result?
Maybe, but the machine found its own mistakes and fixed them faster than I ever could have found them myself. I would say this part doesn't work, and it would go and figure out what was broken, then explain why.
So this is not about proper verification, but about the inability to verify?
The question is not whether this verification is perfect. The question is that before this, I couldn't verify anything at all. The last time I programmed something was in school, and that was a very long time ago.
I see. You pressed yes around 600 times without reading.
Yes, I was experimenting and agreeing to everything out of curiosity. It was important for me to finish the process.
And how is that different from signing a contract blindly?
Not at all, except that with a contract, at least the terms exist somewhere on paper beforehand. Here, I don't even know that.
Then, let me clarify. When you pressed yes, were you delegating the work or transferring responsibility? Were you delegating the work or transferring responsibility?
I thought I was delegating the work.
And in fact,
the responsibility as well. The word daemon kept coming up in the code, a kind of servant, a process that runs in the background, serves its purpose, and doesn't explain itself. And I don't ask questions.
good. If there is an error in the system that won't manifest immediately, how will you detect it?
When it becomes noticeable.
So you won't detect it, but encounter the consequences?
Yes, it bothers me less than it probably should. And that is exactly what's strangest about this whole story.
And between the error and the moment you notice it, there could be a period of time during which the system will be operating incorrectly?
Of course.
And that doesn't worry you?
Not particularly.
You used to get irritated with people who needed detailed technical specifications.
For years. Smart, educated, polite professionals. And they wouldn't take a single step without a written brief. Every time I thought, by the time I write this brief, I'll have already done the work myself. Twice.
And now you have a system that doesn't need one. Is that because it is smarter, or because it doesn't ask questions that would be difficult for you to answer?
The second one, possibly.
So, what disappeared was not the need for clarity, but the pressure to formulate that clarity.
Because the machine understands pretty well what is required of it, even if you make a mistake in the wording or make a typo. You talk to it like an old acquaintance who already has the context. Where a person would stop and wait for clarification, it simply tries. It misses on the first attempt, the second, the fifth, and somewhere around the 20th, it gets it. But it hits the mark.
Iteration is cheaper than precision?
In my case, yes. 20 attempts cost me less than one perfectly formulated task.
In your case, that's 4 days and one script. Could you apply the same principle where the cost of an error is high.
No.
So the principle works as long as the consequences remain limited?
As long as they're survivable, yes.
If errors accumulate unnoticed, who pays for them?
I do.
With what exactly?
Most likely, competence. An understanding of how everything works. I used to lose knowledge of specific facts and dates. Now it seems I'm losing the knowledge of how things work from the inside. It's similar to the same process, just as if it were the next level.
Are you sure that's the only price?
No.
You claim that knowing what you want is the last human function.
I used to think that sounded like freedom. In reality, it is the hardest question our species has ever had to face. Which of my desires are nourishment and which are poison? I'm not always capable of telling the difference myself.
When you pressed yes 600 times, were you acting from that knowledge?
I'm not sure.
So you were simply agreeing with whatever the system proposed. Then how do you distinguish your own desire from something that was suggested to you?
I don't.
You use the metaphor of a servant.
Another good example from children's science fiction is the scene where they put a person into a capsule and the machine figures out on its own what to do, how to treat them. Back then, that seemed more incredible than a starship.
Did you verify that this servant had no goals of its own?
No,
Why?
because it completed its tasks.
So, the smoothness of the process became sufficient proof of its safety?
Yes,
If accuracy becomes optional, who then takes over the function of verification?
I don't know.
So that function could disappear?
It could, and most likely it will.
If the next generation doesn't understand how systems are built, who will fix them?
I don't know.
Where is your boundary? The moment when you stop pressing yes and start reading?
In the case of the program, there was no boundary. I was like in that movie saying yes to everything on principle. It was an experiment. The whole point was not to stop
Why?
because it's interesting, well, and enjoyable too.
Enjoyable? Not understanding?
Enjoyable that everything works by itself.
And one final question. If the bill really does come later, do you assume you'll have the option not to pay it?
No.
I see.